Testing? Oh yeah, there we go. I trust everyone's favorite college football team won this weekend. I don't know, I didn't keep track of it. I see lots of smiles, so that must have happened. The slide says week 11, and that's accurate. However, this particular slide deck is probably both week 11 and week 12, because what we're about to talk about is going to take about 2 weeks for us to discuss this next topic. Last week, we completed our discussions on Genesis chapter 13. We discussed the plains of Mamre, where the patriarchs spent a lot of time. The cave of Mamre, the cave of Machpelah, where the patriots are buried, and the ancient city of Hebron. So this week, we're going to move on to chapter 14. Before we read the text, let's set the stage. Chapter 14 is all about the battle of the valley of Siddim, and of course, Abram's rescue of his nephew Lot. In this battle, 4 Mesopotamian kings are going to go to battle against the kings of the 5 cities of the plains that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Want to note that we're reading from the NIV. This is chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. At the time when Amraphel was king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, these kings went to war against Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor. So a lot of places there. There's actually 9 places there. Now, the 5 cities of the plain we talked about 2 weeks ago, and we stated that they are located south of the Dead Sea. So I'm not going to talk about them today, except to say that if you notice from the text, Bela, or also known as Zor, that city was so small that the name of the king of the city wasn't even mentioned. It was so insignificant that we don't know the name of the king of that city. So if we start with the 4 places, they're not all cities, the places in Mesopotamia, we'll start with Shinar. And back in week 3, I discussed the Bible's use of the term Shinar. I stated that Shinar was used 8 times in the Bible. All of the references to Shinar are to the land in southern Mesopotamia. I then stated that this refers either to the Sumerian civilization or to the Babylonian Empire, depending on the time period being discussed. Well, it turns out there's this short period between the fall of the Sumerian Empire and the start of the Babylonian Empire. This period is called the Isin-Larsa period, which lasted about 250 years. This period is named for the 2 major cities of Isin and Larsa that were in competition with each other for dominance during that period, and it turns out that this battle was fought in that short time period. So when I said that it either refers to the Sumerian civilization or the Babylonian Empire, I was in error. It could also refer to the Isin-Larsan period, short period time frame. The king of Shinar is likely to be a king of one of the city-states in Shinar. This city may or may not be Babylon. At the time of the Battle of the Valley of Siddim, Babylon would have been a recently founded city, founded about 50 years prior to the battle. So it was recently founded compared to the other cities that were there for 1,000+ years. At the time of the battle, the city of Larsa was the dominant power in Shinar. The name Raphael, king of Shinar, is not linguistically identified with any of the known kings of the cities in Shinar during this time frame. So we don't know which king or even which city they're referring to here. So we'll move on to the next one, which is El-Assar. The identity of El-Assar is not uniformly accepted by scholars. However, the vast majority of scholars identify the Mesopotamian city of Larsa with the biblical El-Larsa based on the linguistic similarities and what was known about the history of Larsa during this time frame. The end of the Sumerian civilization occurred when the king of Elam attacked and sacked the city of Ur, which was the capital of Sumer at the time. When the Ur III dynasty came to an end at the hands of the Elamites, a power vacuum occurred, which the other city-states sought to fill. The king of the city of Isin stepped in and became the dominant power for over 100 years. Governors were appointed to rule over the other city-states. The governor of Larsa was named Gun-Gunum. Eventually, he broke with the ruler of Isin, and he captured the city of Ur, which was a seaport on the Persian Gulf coast. Isin lost access to its enormously profitable trade routes. In addition, Gun-Gunum also rerouted the water canals away from Isin and into Larsa, which severely crippled Isin. Larsa grew powerful and established an alliance with the king of Elam. Meanwhile, Isin was losing control, and an outside king seized the throne of Isin. The name Arioch, king of El-Assar, is not linguistically identified with any of the known kings of the city of Larsa during this time frame, so we don't know the historical character of this particular king. That leads us to Elam. Elam is not a city, it's a kingdom. The kingdom of Elam is well known and is not in dispute by scholars. At the time frame of Abram, Elam was in the southwest portion of the modern-day Iran. Elam was on the eastern border of Sumer in the north, and it extended southward along the eastern shore of the Persian Gulf. I'll show you a map in just a moment. The capital of Elam was Susa. It's interesting to note that the events described in Genesis 14 fit squarely within what historians recognize as the Elamite conquest period. This is a 300-year period that is the only time period in Elam's history that Elam intervened extensively in the politics of Mesopotamia. The Elamite records of kings are not complete, as they are for Mesopotamia. It's not possible to identify the name Kedor-Laomer, king of Elam, with the incomplete list of king names for this time frame. However, it's interesting to note that all of the kings of Elam during this time frame, at least the ones that are known, have the prefix of Kedor, like Kedor-Laomer. Kedor, in the Elamite language, meant either servant or worshiper of. And it turns out that Laomer was the god of the city of Susa. So worshiper of the god or servant of the god would be an appropriate name for all of the kings during that time frame. So Kedor-Laomer may not necessarily have been the name of a specific king from Elam, but just a title for the ruler itself. Now, this is a map of the Middle East at about 1800 BC. This would be about 50 to 75 years after the Battle of Siddim. It's about 350 years earlier than the map I typically show you. At the time of this map, 1800 BC, the area in southern Mesopotamia is still under the Isin-Larsan period and is under control of Larsa, That's this area right here that's currently labeled Babylon. About 8 years after the date of this map, Hammurabi, the king of the city of Babylon, will capture the city of Larsa, and he will expand Babylon into an empire. So the city of Larsa is right there. Unless your eyes are much better than mine, you're not going to be able to read that. But it's near the Gulf. It's in between Uruk, which we've talked about before, and the city of Ur, which is right on the Persian Gulf. The location of the city of Isin is right about here. It's upstream on the Euphrates side. The location of the kingdom of Elam, this is Elam here, and notice it borders the kingdom of Sumer, or the Isin-Larsan period at this point. So this is Elam, and its capital of Susa is right there. So it's in modern-day Iran. That leads us to the fourth king, Goyim. Now, the Hebrew definition of Goyim is peoples or nations. Most scholars accept that Goyim in this verse doesn't refer to a nation, but to a collection of tribes. The name Tidal, king of Goyim, is thought by scholars to be the Hebrew transliteration of the Hittite name of Tudhaliya, which is a common Hittite name. Linking this name to a specific historic individual is not possible at this time. So we're going to move on to verses 3 and 4. There are no place names in 3 or 4, but I want to read this because it sets the stage for the next slide. All these later kings joined the forces of the valley of Sadium, that is, the Dead Sea Valley. For 12 years they had been subject to Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. And this is where we'll spend a significant amount of time this week and the rest, and next week as well. Verses 5 through 7. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him went out and defeated the Rephites in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzites in Ham, the Emites in the Shaveh Kiriath-Haim, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran, near the desert. Then they turned back and went to En-Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites, as well as the Amorites, who were living in the Hazazon Tamar. That's a mouthful. There's a whole bunch of places there and people to talk about. So 6 place names. We'll start with Ashtaroth Karnaim. It turns out that Ashtaroth Karnaim is not one town, but 2 towns. They're only 2.5 miles apart. Archaeologists are familiar with both sites. The biblical Ashtaroth is identified as the modern-day Tel Ashtara, located about 35 miles east of the Sea of Galilee in Syria. The biblical Karnaim is identified as being inside the modern-day Syrian town of Al-Saqi-Siyad, that's a mouthful too, which is 2.5 miles northeast of Tel Ashtara. Now this is the same map I showed you earlier, although I've blown it up to show you just the Israel portion of this map. And for the next, you'll see this map several times as the battles are moving. The arrows will show you where they're at. Genesis 14:5 says that the first battle listed was Ashtaroth Karnaim, the home of the Raphaites. Deuteronomy 2:10 tells us that the Raphaites were strong, numerous, and as tall as the Anakites. In other words, the Israelites considered them giants. The Raphaites is not an Israeli word, it's the word of the local Ammon, and Moses just used that word. So if the Hebrews had used this word, they'd have probably used the word Anakites, but they just adopted the local word that was being used there. This is a pattern you're going to see for the other towns as well. The two towns of Ashtaroth and Karnaim are about 35 miles east of the Sea of Galilee. This is a satellite view of the archaeology site of El Ashtara. You can see circular city walls, a lot of rubble in the middle. Ashtaroth is mentioned 7 times in the Bible. In Genesis 14:5, Ashtaroth Karnaim is mentioned as the site of the first battle of the military campaign leading up to the Battle of Siddim. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, Joshua chapter 9, Joshua chapter 12, and Joshua chapter 13, Ashtaroth is mentioned in connection with the Israeli conquest of the Promised Land. This would be some 400 years after the Battle of Siddim. In Joshua chapter 13 and 1 Chronicles chapter 6, Ashtaroth is mentioned as part of the inheritance assigned to the half-tribe of Manasseh. The city of Ashtaroth is in many historical records. It's mentioned in the annals of the Pharaoh of King Thutmose III, which align the walls of the temple of Ammon in Karnak, as shown on the next slide. This is a photo of a small portion of the annals of Thutmose III in the temple of Ammon in the Karnak, Egypt. If your eyes are good, you can tell that these are rows and rows of people with their hands tied behind their back with shields, and written on the shields, on each shield is a cartouche, and the cartouche is the name of the city of the king. The figure is the king of the city, the ruler of the city. Hands tied behind his back, and there's 119 city names. Each one of these was captured by Thutmose. Thutmose III reigned between 1504 and 1450 BC. This would be about 50 to 100 years just prior to the Israeli conquest into Canaan. Ashtaroth is listed as one of the 119 city names, indicating that the city was occupied in the decades just prior to the conquest. Ashtaroth is also mentioned in 5 of the Amarna letters, which we talked about in weeks 6 and 10. You may recall that these letters were written between the Pharaoh of Egypt and the rulers of the cities in Canaan, the Transjordan region, Mesopotamia, and the Hittite region, in today what we call modern Turkey. The letters are dated between 1353 and 1336 BC, and this would be written during the conquest period using the biblical timeline. Many of these letters from the city rulers of Canaan identify significant turmoil arising with a people called the Habaru and describe them as conquering Canaanite territories. For research and reference purposes, these tablets have been registered from EA, standing for El Amarna, where they were found, EA1 to EA382. The numbering doesn't follow a chronological order. These are examples of the Amarna letters. In Amarna letter EA256, written by the son of the ruler at Shechem, the king of Ashtaroth, Ahab, is described as being missing from his city at Ashtaroth. He's probably missing because he's probably in jail or in prison or captured at Shechem. Don't know that for a fact. That's just what is believed. In letter EA 89, Ahab responds that he was captured by and had escaped from the Habaru. In letter EA 274, he again talks about his capture and subsequent release, or escape, I'm sorry. This time he mentions being taken to the land of the Habaru. He was probably at Shechem. In EA 364, Ahab affirms his loyalty to the Pharaoh and details the capture of 3 nearby cities by the Habaru. In EA 197, the ruler of the city of Damascus, and this is a hard name, Biryawaza, describes how the ruler of Ashtaroth, Ahab, and had the city gates of a third city, Adurra, closed, sealing the ruler of Damascus in. According to Biryawaza, Ahab then enlisted the help of 2 other kings to attempt to kill him. Biryawaza claims to have escaped and went back to Damascus. Ashtaroth is also mentioned in the Assyrian relief, which currently resides in the British Museum. This is the Assyrian relief. It shows a Syrian with looks like a scepter, and the 3 capturees, if you will, each holding a bag, each with pointed-toed shoes, and you may or may not be able to tell underneath that is cuneiform writing. The relief depicts the Assyrians removing people from Ashtaroth in 730 to 727 BC. The relief was excavated in Nimrod by Austin Henry Laird in 1851. The city name of Ashtaroth is inscribed in cuneiform at the top of the relief. 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 29, mentions this invasion by Tilgath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, and lists several of the cities he captured, although it does not specifically mention Ashtaroth. Okay, we still got about another 20 minutes. So now we're going to turn our attention to Carneum. This is a satellite view of the archaeology site at Carneum. Carneum is mentioned twice in the Bible. In Genesis 14:5, Ashtaroth Carneum is mentioned as a site of the first battle of the military campaign leading up to the Battle of Sidium. In Amos chapter 6, verse 13, Carneum is mentioned in a prophecy about the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel about 600 years after the conquest. Amos is criticizing the Israelites who are boasting about the conquest, and Carneum is mentioned as one of the cities being taken in those boasts. It's in Al-Saqi-Sa'ad in Syria. Oh, it was very small, very small. Today we might think of it as an outpost. I'll show you a picture of the site in just a minute. There's been a lot of archaeology done at Carneum, but not what I'm going to call extensive archaeology. The only real excavation at the site at Al-Saqi-Sa'ad occurred in the 1920s by a Czech scholar named Bedřich Rázný. He uncovered Middle Bronze terracotta pottery dating to the time frame of the patriarchs. He also found pottery during the time frames of King David, the Hellenistic era, and the Roman era. He also found an Egyptian stele from the Ramses II era a Neo-Hittite sculpture which dates to the King David era, and a Roman era sculpture. Other than the Bible, there's little to no mention of Carneum in historical texts before the Assyrian military campaign in 730 BC. However, after that time frame, there's quite a bit. After the destruction of neighboring Ashtaroth in 730 BC, Ashtaroth lost its prominence and Carneum annexed its name, becoming the capital of the land of Bashan. Ashtaroth Carneum then is found in several Assyrian texts, and Assyria names the area around the city as the Carneum district. Carneum is mentioned in the book of Jubilees and in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, neither of which are in the Bible. And both of those are believed to have been written, or all three of those, written in the 2nd century BC. In the 1st century AD, Eusebius and then later Jerome write about Carneum and place it in the vicinity of the house of Job. So if you've ever wondered where Job was, Eusebius believed that it was in modern-day Syria. So to summarize, archaeology supports the Bible's claim that both Ashtaroth and Carneum were cities at both the time of the patriarchs and the time of the Israeli conquest into the Promised Land. And I guess I don't have that picture. I did have a picture of the city of Carneum. It's really a small part inside of a larger Syrian. Oh, I remember why I didn't put it. It's got a bunch of houses on it right now. And so out of privacy reasons, I decided not to use the satellite image. So that brings us up to Ham, which is the second battle mentioned in Genesis 14. And this is the home of the Zuzites. Zuzites by that name are only mentioned once in the Bible, and that's here in Genesis 14. However, most Bible scholars believe that the Zuzites of Genesis chapter 14 are the same people as the Zamzumites in Deuteronomy chapter 2. Deuteronomy tells us that the Zamzumites are Rephites, or giants, but the Ammonites call them Zamzumites. So Zamzumite is an Ammonite word, not a Hebrew word. If the Hebrews had written this, it probably would have been, they'd probably use the word Anakites, their word for giants. Archaeologists believe that the biblical city of Ham in Genesis 14 is the small town of Ham in modern-day Jordan. Okay, this is the battle map, and you see that Ham is not that far away from Ashtaroth Carneum. This is the same map I showed you earlier. I just added the city of Ham. The biblical town of Ham, the home of the Zuzites, is modern-day Jordan, about 25 miles southwest of Ashtaroth, Syria, and about 10 miles east of Jordan River. The archaeology site of Tel Ham today is covered with houses, and no archaeological excavations have been conducted. This town of Ham is only mentioned once in the Bible, in chapter 14 of Genesis, in conjunction with this battle. So then we'll move on to Shavei Kiriathim, Kiriath-Hayim, which is the third battle mentioned in Genesis 14. In Hebrew, the word Shavei means plain or valley. Kiriath-Hayim combines two Hebrew words, Kiriath, which means city, and Ayim, which means two or double. So the whole phrase means the valley of the double city. The exact location of Shavei Kiriath-Hayim is not known, but the Bible tells us that it's in the Moab Mountains. So I've put it right there in the middle of the Moab Mountains. It could be a little bit north of that, or it could be a little bit south of that, but it's in that general region. The biblical town of Kiriath-Hayim is the home of the Emites. The word comes from the Moab word Amim, that means giant people, similar to the Hebrew Anakim. and we talked about those people near Hebron. Kiryat Hayim is mentioned 4 times in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 14, the valley of Kiryat Hayim is the site of the third battle of the Mesopotamian campaign against the Transjordan cities. In Numbers 32, verse 37, and Joshua chapter 13, it is mentioned as part of the inheritance of the tribe of Reuben. In those 2 chapters, Kiryat Hayim is listed with other cities which are located in the Moab Mountains. Lastly, in Jeremiah 48, verse 1, Kiryat Hayim is mentioned as part of a prophecy of the destruction of Moab. So next we'll move on to the site of the 4th battle, as mentioned in Genesis 14, verses 5 through 7, and that is the hill country of Seir. We'll also discuss El Paran, since it is on the southern tip of the hill country of Seir. The general location of the hill country of Seir is well known. However, the location of Mount Seir within the hill country is still being debated. This is a topographical map of the southeast portion of modern-day Israel. Israel is located in the northwestern part. This is Israel here. Remember, it comes down like this and then goes back up. This is a sharp V here. Jordan is on the east bank here. This is all Jordan, and it comes all the way down to here. And in this part, this little bitty part here is Saudi Arabia and south. This is Egypt from here to about here, all of this. I want to point out there are 2 mountain ranges within this green area, this hill country of Seir. There's this eastern range, which starts way up here and comes all the way down. Actually, it keeps going down by the Red Sea. And then there's this western hill range, which starts up here and then ends abruptly right here. So these mountains and these mountains are all considered part of the hill country of Seir. El Paran is down here at the northern tip of the Red Sea in the modern-day city of Elath. At the time of Abraham, the hill country of Seir was inhabited by the Horites. Genesis 36, verses 20 through 30 state that Seir was the father of the Horites. About 200 years later, at the time of Jacob, the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau, the Edomites, destroyed the remaining Horites and took over the land, as explained in Deuteronomy chapter 2. So this is the continuation of the battle line. Goes down south, and he says they chased them all the way down to El Paran. The phrase hill country of Seir, or land of Seir, occurs 21 times in the Bible. Prior to Esau, the phrases are all connected with the Horites and the descendants of Seir. After the time of Esau, the 2 phrases are connected with the Edomites, the descendants of Esau. Mount Seir is mentioned 9 times in the Bible, and the exact location of Mount Seir within those 2 mountain ridges is still being debated. This is the same map I showed. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm way behind. Paran, let me back a slide up. Paran, which is on the southern tip of the hill country of Seir. Paran is mentioned 11 times in the Bible, 3 times as a city, 6 times as part of the phrase desert of Paran, and 2 times as part of the phrase Mount Paran. The location of Mount Paran is uncertain. The desert of Paran is the place where Ishmael and his mother went after leaving Abram's tents. It is one of the places where the Israelites spent part of their 40 years roaming, wandering the desert after the Exodus. Excuse me. It's also one of the places of the refuge for King David, or for David before he became king. The city of Paran is believed to be in the northern city of Elath at the northern tip of the Red Sea. Now I'm on this slide. So next we'll move on to the site of the fifth battle mentioned in Genesis 14, and that is En Mishpat, which verse 7 tells us is Kadesh. And from now on, I'm just going to refer to the place as Kadesh. It's easy to miss the very careful wording of Genesis chapter 14, verse 7. It says that Chedorlaomer and the other Mesopotamian kings, quote, conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites. It does not say that they conquered the Amalekites. That would have been a neat trick, since the Amalekites weren't even around at the time of Abraham and this battle. This is another example of Moses, the inspired author of Genesis, using an anachronism to help his audience understand geography. Genesis chapter 36, verses 2 and 12 explain that the Amalekites were descendants of Esau's great-grandson Amalek. Therefore, the Amaleks are a subtribe of the Edomites that are about 400 years removed from Abram. But they would have been known to Moses' audience at the time of the conquest, at the time that he wrote Genesis. The Bible does not specifically state who were the people living at Kadesh at the time of Chedorlaomer's invasion, but it's likely the Kenites. Genesis chapter 15, verse 19 states that the Kenites were present at the time of Abram and elsewhere. The Bible tells us that they lived in the Negev. Today, Kadesh is identified as Tel El Kudarat, which lies in Egypt near the southern border of Israel. Are there any questions? I threw a lot at you. If there are no questions, I think I'll pause here and pick it up here next week. Thank you. And get ready for our worship service.